All right, hey everybody. We are going to do a few things in Illustrator, and I'm going to show you guys how to do image trace. So that's where we start a document. So let me get a new one started here. And we're just going to create a 12 by 12 document, but you can make it whatever size you want based on what your project is. So that's set over here, 12 by 12 inches. We're just going to call this test 1. Okay, great. So now that I'm in my virtual artboard here, this is a canvas or an artboard. This little button down here is the artboard tool. If we wanted to adjust the size of that, we can either do it by grabbing handles or by adjusting it up top. We're going to leave it at 12 by 12 for now. And I want to show you how to bring in an image from the internet and how to modify it from being a JPEG, which is basically like a picture of an image, into something that is a dynamic vector graphic. So we call those SVG files, or scalable vector graphics. And SVG files are really special because they allow us to work with the vinyl cutter and the laser cutter and do some really unique things. So if we come up here to File, Place, I've got a couple images on my desktop that I want to take a look at. Some are good for image tracing for different applications, and some are not great. So I just grabbed that deer skull. I'm just going to drop it on the page here. I'm going to use the Alt button and my scroll on the mouse to zoom out so that I can see this object. Obviously it's very large, but don't worry about that right now because we'll scale it later. So this is one that I found. I liked this image that I found online. I have the object selected. So again, your selection tool allows you to click on that in case you're not selecting it. There are no options up on the top here. So click on your JPEG. We're going to do image trace. And sometimes it takes a minute and we'll see what it comes up with. So it rendered this version of that image. I'd like to adjust some of the parameters. So you're going to open Image Trace panel, which is this guy right here. Scooch that over to the side so we can adjust things together. So make sure that your Advanced tab is open. I like to ignore white, and I do like to have it in black and white mode. Now this is going to be particularly useful for laser cutting and vinyl cutting. Because when you think about it, the machine is either on or off. It's either black or nothing. That is particularly true with the vinyl cutter, so making stickers and heat transfers and things like that. Your threshold has the strongest parameter output. So you can see that that made a really big difference, and we're starting to see a little bit more definition in this. But something that I wanted to point out is that the reason why I selected this image is because it's not actually that great for vinyl cutting. It's definitely going to be a lot easier for laser cutting and laser engraving. But vinyl cutting, not so much, partly because everywhere that you see these little like blank spots and little blips and dots, it's going to be trying to cut those out. So there's just a lot of extra noise in this one. I can try turning that particular parameter down, but I don't know that it's going to make much of a difference here. In fact, that actually brought more definition back. Sometimes you just need to play around with these toggles. And sometimes they're really fun. Like you can actually modify things in a pretty interesting way. Sometimes they look really, really jagged. So again, stylize your image accordingly. An important thing to note is when you get these, this looking the way that you want it, you need to expand up here. This is what executes the action of image trace. So until you do this, it is still kind of in no man's land of being between a JPEG and an SVG file. Once I have expanded that, let me go ahead and close this and zoom out a little bit so that we can look at what we've got here. You've got some really fun things that you can do. First of all, we can zoom in and we can see that it's no longer pixelated because we have successfully converted it into an SVG file. But we can also click on it again, I'm in my selection tool, right click, ungroup, click off of it, click back on it again, and now we can start to isolate some of the different things. Sometimes it's helpful to release the compound path as well, and sometimes it does things like that. Control Z or Command Z to undo that step. But because I ungrouped, I can come up here and I can grab some of these objects and just simply delete them to clean this up a little bit. Now I'm in my general selection tool and I can select larger objects and delete them. If I want to clean up this piece right here, if I am in my general selection tool and I go to delete, it's going to do that, which is not exactly helpful. Control or Command Z. If I go into this one, however, the direct selection tool, I can very selectively, do you see how those are darker blue in that area? I can delete that, and now I have trimmed that up a little bit. Again, the direct selection tool allows you to grab nodes and to work on a very fine level of cleaning up your object, whereas your selection tool, you're selecting big objects at one time. Sometimes, again, you can right-click and adjust things accordingly. Okay, so I've got this object. I can always take a look at what happens when I swap the stroke and the fill. So this is, again, quite a bit of information in there for the vinyl cutter to make sense of, because it's going to be cutting everywhere that you see these lines. So it's going to be a bit of a process to clean that up. Doesn't mean that it's not possible, it just means it's going to have a lot of noise in there that you're going to have to deal with one way or another. Now again, if you're laser engraving or laser cutting, you're not going to have to worry so much about that. I'm going to go ahead and group this together, which is Command or Control G. That's the quick key there. I do like using the hotkeys for Illustrator. It just makes everything go a little bit faster. Okay, cool. So that is example one. I'm going to go ahead and bring in another one of a different skull that's a simplified version, and we're going to see how these compare. So again, I'm going to go a little bit faster this time. Image Trace, open up that panel. Let's see, I really like how that turned out. Ignore white, expand. Great. So now this one has a lot less of that noise in there. So this is going to be a much easier project to weed if I wanted to turn this into a heat transfer or to cut parts of this out. We'll go over that in another video to talk a little bit more about what you are telling the laser cutter or the vinyl cutter to do with these objects. Especially with the laser cutter, you do have the opportunity to both engrave or sort of burn the areas that are dark, but you also are able to cut parts of your shapes out based on the line thickness that you associate with your vector graphic. But in this case, if I were to just kind of take a look at these two different objects here that I have in Illustrator and assess them, I would say that this one on the left is really cool visually and graphically. It might be a really good object to print out or really successful in the laser cutter. It may not be as successful in the vinyl cutter or doing a vinyl print, heat press print, though it would probably be fairly successful for screen printing, which is a different process. This one, however, would be a lot more successful in both the laser cutter and the vinyl cutter because it is a simplified shape. I also just want to go ahead and show you that if you select an object and you go into Object and Path, there is another option to simplify here, which is really useful. And this can be very, very helpful when you do have complicated shapes. So again, if you're all the way to the right here, it's the original image, and if you're somewhere to the left, it simplifies those shapes. Again, that can be an extremely useful tool. So that's under Object, Path, Simplify.